Good morning and welcome to Sharp Faith. I've not seen you since last year, so it's been a long time. And it's a real pleasure to be back and go back to this what wants to be a year-long reflection on the issues of evil and suffering and healing. And in connection with the Passion and the Resurrection. Someone told me a few months ago that it's a bit depressing as a topic, especially to have to think and talk about this over a long time. And personally, I've been reading extensively about this since probably June of last year. I spent most of my holidays, when I was in Puerto Rico, for my holidays, I was by the swimming pool reading books on evil and suffering. And I was so fascinated by it that I really enjoyed it. I mean, that's quite strange. Because I have the feeling that we are at the heart of our faith when it comes to these issues, and also that we are dealing here with probably one of the greatest, I'd say, problems for our faith, especially for us as modern people. And I'm going to focus today especially on why this issue has become so vexing for us. It was not the case for most of history, for most of Christian history. It has become something that really has changed the landscape of belief and Christianity, especially since the Enlightenment, since in the past 200 years. As a premise also I want to say, so we, if you remember, we spent a couple of months with great novelists mapping the issue of evil and suffering. I think it was very important not to dive straight away into the theology or the, let's say, in inverted commas, intellectual complications of it, but get acquainted with the complexity of the problem, get acquainted with the human dimension of it. Because one of the problems of the way in which a lot of philosophy and theology has approached the issue of evil and suffering is that it has become so intellectualized and so theoretical that it has led to statement, assertions, conclusions that make sense on the paper, make sense logically, but have no power to give comfort to people when they are actually in the midst of suffering, in the midst of difficulties in their lives. And I think it is a fundamental test of any approach or any conversation, any theory, any attempt to deal with the issue of suffering and evil, that if it does not speak to people when they are in the midst of suffering, if it does not bring comfort, if it does not bring meaning, there is a problem. Okay? So the premise is, for me, as we embark on this exploration, which will last for the next 4 weeks, is that yes, we are going to look into, let's say, the theological or logical or philosophical aspects of this issue. At some points it might, I hope it won't be the case, but it will look a little bit theoretical. But my aim is really to reach a point in which all this conversation, all this, everything we are going to see about this topic will help us to make sense, to find meaning in the midst of suffering in our lives. Will help us to have a different or a deeper, let's say, approach to the presence of evil in life. So let's start from the beginning, and the beginning is, of course, the book of Genesis. Okay, so every Christian discourse on the question of evil and suffering has to start from the book of Genesis. You know the passage. I'm just going to, you have it in number 1 in your handout. We are just going to see one of the few passages and try to establish what is the basis on which we, as Christians, as people whose approach, vision of the world, worldview is shaped by Scripture, what are the consequences, what are the premises that on the basis of which we have to think about this issue. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And God said, let there be light, and then, the different phases, let be the earth teeming with kind of living beings, the sea, etc., etc., all the different days and the different aspects of creation. But one refrain that comes constantly in the narrative of creation in the book of Genesis is the one you find in 1:2, and God said, let there be light, and there was light, and God saw that the light was good. The light was good, okay? And if you go in 1:6, at the end of the whole creative process, God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. It was not just good, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning the 6th day. Obviously, in 1:3, there is the creation of human beings. Let us make human beings in our image after our likeness. And interestingly and importantly, let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the heavens, livestock. That is, let them be in a position in which they are not at the mercy of the forces that I have deployed, the light, the earth, the stars, etc., but let them have be in a position in which dominion probably doesn't render what God means. It's not just a mastery, a tyrannical mastery, but is a relationship in which all these forces, which are deployed in creation, can be managed for good by human beings. So if we go to number 2, what are the consequences? What are the premises as we start reflecting on evil and suffering from Genesis 1? First is that everything that exists is created by God. This seems, something that we take for granted, but it was a big novelty when the Scripture, when the Hebrew people introduced this idea. It was completely new, because in most cosmogonies, in most cosmologies of the antiquity, all of them, the divinity is more a demiurge, is more someone who there is already something there that is matter or some element, unformed element, and creation is seen more as the work of a potter that finds some mud already there and fashions it. Okay? And this makes the issue of evil and suffering easier to deal with, because one can always say that because God had to work with what was there already, okay, this unformed reality, he was not able to do whatever he wanted. And because this inert principle out of which he created the world is like a dead weight that keeps trying to regain the control over creation that has been established by God. So it is much easier, if you don't believe that God is the creator of everything, to make sense of evil, to make sense of the world being not as good as Scripture wants us to believe in. And the other thing is that not only God created everything, but God created ex nihilo, out of nothing. This was established very, very early on. It's not entirely clear in the creation narrative of Genesis that God created out of nothing, but It's a principle that theology, Christian theology established very early on as being essential to make sense of everything which is said in Scripture. Then God is all-powerful. The image we receive in this page of Genesis is that God says, let there be light, and there is light. Let there be earth, and there is earth. So God is someone who just, by saying something can make something. So he's all-powerful, and he is benevolent. Why does he do what he does? Is because he wants to create good and goodness, and not only for his own enjoyment, but for the enjoyment of human beings. So he creates the human beings, and he creates them in his own image, which is a way of saying he doesn't want servants, he doesn't want slaves, he wants friends. He wants people who, even if they are not gods, they are placed on the same level as God, and they are given intelligence, rationality, dominion, so that they become, in a sense, partners in the managing of the created world. So he's all-powerful, he's benevolent, and there is no evil in creation. That's the other thing that appears from this page of Genesis. Everything is orderly. Everything is as it should be. Everything works like a clock. Everything is perfect. And human beings, as I said, are in the image of God in the sense that, among other things, they receive a share in God's dominion over creation. This implies that nothing should be able to harm them. Nothing should be able to harm them. Okay? Then we get to Genesis 2 and 3. You know the story. You know that in Genesis there are two different stories about how creation happened. They do not coincide, they are different. The image of how God created are not exactly the same. This is very important because we don't need science. We don't need critical biblical criticism to know that these are not meant to be scientific accounts or literal accounts of how creation happened. They are meant to be parables that give give us images, so that do not say to us how things really happened, but tell us what is true in terms of what things are, who God is, who we are, what our relation with the world is or should be, etc., etc. So in this, in Genesis 3, we have, of course, the story of God placing a tree in the garden, number 3:1, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, okay, and the injunction not to eat of this fruit. And then we have, of course, the serpent who persuades the woman to eat of the fruit, and the consequences are the curses on the serpent, on Adam and on Eve. So in the narrative of the Genesis, creation was good. There was no evil in it. God created everything in such a way that everything should have been good. And evil, suffering, death, decay, everything which we consider negative appeared at one point, and appeared at one point as a consequence of something done by human beings. Okay? So hence the enmity between, the serpent, and by the serpent represents all the animal kingdom between the serpents and human beings. Then in 3:4, pain in childbearing, bringing forth children. Then desire shall be contrary to your husband, and he shall rule over you. So the relation becomes between the human beings one of attraction and domination, and one of competition, one of conflict. And then to Adam, he said that the ground is cursed because of you. You will take food out of the earth through pain and work. And finally, you are going to die. You are dust, and in dust you shall return. Which means that in the narrative of Genesis, death was not something that God wanted to be part of what it means to be human beings. Okay? So let's go quickly over. I know you know everything, but I think it was very important to kind of revisit very quickly these principles, and we're going to see why it is important. So the consequences are that evil, number 4, suffering and death were introduced as a result of our choices. So according to this page of Genesis, if there is evil and suffering and death and decay, if there are mosquitoes, if you know the sharks eat us, etc., is because of something we have done, not God has done. There is mention of a malefic influence under the symbol of the serpent, but it is also a creature, very interestingly. So it's not another God. Is not a competitor, is not someone who existed out there before God, is a creature completely subjected to God's power, to the point that God can curse it after the serpent has done what he has done. Okay? And yet, the question is God without responsibility in all this? Even if Genesis says that it is us who have chosen to do something that has created all the imbalance that has resulted in evil and suffering in the world, is God without responsibility? Has he not created the conditions for this to happen? How can a world in which it is even just possible for evil and pain to happen be called good? At the very least, we have to say that, yes, God created everything good, etc., but he also created the possibility, or let's say created a world in which it was possible for evil, for suffering, for decay, for disorder to happen. Now, you would say that, you know, if you're really a good inventor, you should be able to prevent this. And especially if you are someone who is powerful, as benevolent, as omniscient as God. I mean, I would have expected a bit more from you, okay? So where is the good in this? Where is the good in creating a world in which there is the possibility of evil happening? The answer, which seems to come from from Genesis, formulated in the simplest way, is that we are created in the image of God. We are created to be in a relationship with Him, and a relationship of reciprocity. And of love, and we know very well that there is no love without freedom. That's how the classical argument goes. Human freedom is a good of such magnitude that God decided it was worth the risk. It was worth the risk. Freedom is a good because without freedom there is no love. Okay, so this is something that this is the usual version that is always given about why in Christianity, why there is evil in the world. One fundamental consequence of this picture in number 5 is that everything bad and disordered, whether directly caused by human actions, murders, betrayals, wars, slavery, and all the like, or in nature, earthquakes, illnesses, decay, can be traced back to bad choices, that is, to free will. Okay? The problem of evil would not be a problem or a conundrum if all we had to deal with was, things which are evidently traceable back to bad choices or to evil choices. The problem is that why there is, why there are tsunamis, why there is earthquakes, why there are illnesses that kill people, and ultimately why there is death. These are not things that are directly traceable to human choices. But Scripture seems to say yes. Genesis seems to say yes. yes, even this is the consequence of evil choices made by human beings. So this version has been virtually taken for granted in Christianity basically until the Enlightenment in the 18th century. When there was a plague, the famous Great Plague of 1348 that wiped out a third of the population of Europe, what people did was to pray more and to ask for God to intervene. There were processions, there were penitential acts. Nobody even thought that this is something, it was evident for everyone, this must be the consequences of something bad we have done. And for this, we have to ask for forgiveness to God and for God's mercy. Nobody even questioned ever the picture which I've described to you up to now. But since then, since the Enlightenment, this version has been seriously called into question by science. It is fascinating. I'm not a scientist by any, and I've always been bad at science at school. But I find fascinating the laws of thermodynamics, and especially the second law, which the principle being, number 8, that the basic structure of the physical universe as we know it, in particular the second law of thermodynamics, is a source both of creaturely possibilities and of creaturely suffering. The principle is that heat and energy always goes from a kind of warmer body to a colder body. Okay? Heat and energy leaves us constantly. At present, I'm losing a huge amount of heat, a huge amount of energies, and unless I eat, unless I rest, unless I cover myself to protect, from excessive dispersion of heat, I'm going to keep kind of losing the energy and the heat to the point that I'm going to die. So unless I preserve as much as possible the heat and the energy in my body, unless I replenish my body constantly, I will reach a point in which inevitably I will die. Okay, this is the principle of an entropy. Okay, the second law states that the overall degree of disorder in a physical system will always tend to increase. And this is valid for absolutely everything in the universe. For human bodies, for stars, for atoms, they all tend to disintegrate, to to disassemble into smaller elements with time. This is the underlying reason why biological organisms continually need to take on nutrients and why they ultimately decay. And the nature of thermodynamics makes possible increases in complexity in the biological world because it creates a very dynamic kind of system. So nothing can ever stay at rest. The fact that I always have to replenish myself with energy, even at a human level, makes me active all the time. I have always to find a way. How can I get the energy I need to keep alive? I have to work, and if I have to work, I have to find ways of creating energy, creating new possibilities. So what is true at a very simple level in the life of in my life is true in the life of absolutely, or in the dynamics of absolutely everything that exists in the universe. So the fact that we have constantly to fight against decay, against losing our integrity, forces everything that exists to be proactive, to be active in creating new possibilities. So the same principle that explains why there is decay and death, etc., is the same one that explains why the universe is so creative, is so full of life, is so full of possibilities. So, number 9, the whole essence of the scientific picture as it has emerged since the 19th century is that it is the same processes, tectonic, creaturely decay, mutation, natural selection, to name only a few, that generate the suffering as also generate the beauty, ingenuity, and diversity of the world of creatures. Okay? There is suffering because the universe is what it is. We want the universe to be beautiful. Well, we have to accept that suffering is not an accident, is the method. Suffering, pain, or what becomes suffering or pain for human beings, which is, destruction, which is disassembling, which is entropy for every other thing that exists, is not an accident, is the method. You see how this picture is in contradiction with this wonderful description of a universe created by God as good. Well, is good in the sense that it's so creative, it's so full of possibilities, but it's also not good in the sense that it implies suffering, it implies what becomes suffering for human beings, it implies this kind of relentless, entropy as part of what explains why it is also so creative. Then science tells us that rational human beings have appeared very late and that for millions of years life on Earth was characterized by brutal and violent competition for survival, predation, struggle, and animal pain. I mean, the fact that planets are, like Mars or Venus are these inhabitable places where there is scorching winds and constant turbulence, etc., I mean, it's not evil, it's just the way it is. But for the planet Earth, from the moment biological organisms appeared, and then organisms that were endowed with sensitivity, senses that could feel pain, dinosaurs could feel pain, okay? The idea that it was good, that there should be a kind of order in which animals eat each other. Something which is really striking when you look at dinosaurs is the level of violence and predation that was pervasive in this kind of world. And it was well before any human beings could have eaten any apple that would create this kind of disorder. This sentence by Alfred Tennyson about nature red in tooth and claw. Tennyson was mourning the death of his friend Arthur Hallam and questioning faith, science, and the meaning of life. The phrase appears in a passage where he wrestles with the apparent brutality of nature and wonders if there is any divine justice in such a world. It is a metaphor of the harsh reality of the natural world, where animals fight and kill for survival. It challenges the idea that nature as purely beautiful and harmonious, highlighting its cruel and merciless side. This is basically the Vulgate of everything we know today about science, natural selection, Darwinian evolution, we know is survival of the fittest, which means, that violence and predation is integral to the system. We have reached the point where we are in terms of, everything positive we have is something that has been won at the price of a kind of unbelievable amount of killing and predation and survival, etc. Now, what is the consequence of all this? What is the consequence of this? Is that we have a problem when we think about the issue of evil and suffering that people in the 15th century, 16th century didn't have. And what is this problem? The problem is the distinction in number 11 that people who lived before modernity did not make, namely between moral evils, those that can be ascribed directly to human choices, so murders, slavery, etc., and natural, what we call natural evils, the pain and suffering that cannot be attributed to human beings in any way. Earthquakes, illnesses, decay. With the scientific picture, it is impossible to say in any possible way that human beings or free will, the free will of any being can be in any way responsible for those evil. And we should add that, an earthquake, as I told you, that happens on a deserted island is not evil per se. It is just something that could be seen as a bad thing. a quotation for Matthias Grebe. As far as we can tell, in number 13, natural evils are necessary features of the ecosystem and result from the natural laws of the physical universe. They should not be called evil, since it is impossible to assign responsibility for these events to a created evil. So the scientific worldview has profoundly altered our approach to the problem of evil and suffering. With the progress of science, Christians have tried to reconcile the scientific worldview with the belief in God as a benevolent and all-powerful creator. That creation did not happen in the way described in the book of Genesis does not prevent us from believing that God created the universe through the laws of nature. So, natural evolution, principle of thermodynamics are not per se directly an argument against the existence of God. We can think of God as the person who designed everything. So the modality in which creation happened is not, Genesis want to describe that. So we can reconcile the belief in a God as creator with the laws of science as they are discovered. If we want to maintain that God is benevolent and creation is good, though, we have to interpret the laws of nature as good, even if they can potentially have a harmful, and they do have a harmful impact on human beings. And now there have been two broad tendencies about this. The first one is Leibniz and the second one is Hume, two philosophers. So Leibniz is the one who has invented what we will talk about is theodicy. Theodicy comes from the Greek theos, which means God, and dike, which means justice, is justifying God. It is very interesting that with the appearance of science, philosophers and theologians started to feel that they had to justify God. They had to explain what God was doing, something that people before did not even think of doing. And Leibniz is very simply, he says, the world that exists is the best of all possible worlds. What seems evil and suffering is not really evil and suffering. It's just the pain which is necessary to get the good results God wants to get. Just like the surgeon in 19th century, when he had to amputate a leg, would have to inflict abominable suffering on the person, okay? But that was for a good. So even if, the person might not have known what was happening to him or her when he was being amputated, when eventually got better, would know that this was a good for him. So this is Leibniz. And the other one is Hume, and Hume is the one who really has thrown a spanner in the Christian worldview, and what he said really has become a major problem or a major argument, especially for atheists, in number 27. If God is God willing to prevent evil but not able, then he is impotent. So he's not all-powerful. Or is God able to prevent evil but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Or is God both able and willing, as we believe? Well, then we have no explanation for the origin of evil. We can't explain why there is evil in the world. Okay? So you have those who want to say, evil is, what we call evil is not really evil, is just, the price we have to pay to get what, the good we want to obtain. Or we have those who say, well, no, if God is really this omniscient, all-powerful and benevolent being we believe in, he should have been a bit more clever. He should have been able to create a universe where evil did not happen. Okay? So, since then, number 18, theodicy has become the classical way of approaching the issue of evil and suffering, and introduced many constraints in the way this issue is usually approached. Atheists think that the burden of proof belongs to those who want to affirm the existence of an all-powerful and benevolent God. So, do you want to say that God is all-powerful and benevolent? Then you have to explain where evil comes from. So the burden of the proof is on those who believe in God. Whereas theists, so not necessarily Christians, but those that believe that there is a God, think that, well, we don't really have to prove that God is all-powerful and benevolent despite the existence of evil, but we can show that for all we know, the universe makes sense even if there is evil, and it makes sense to think that a benevolent and all-powerful God might have allowed evil to happen for a greater good. But you already feel, I don't know, each time I come across these formulations, I feel unease, because it becomes very, very kind of intellectually becomes very detached from our life. So if you go to number 21, what has happened with this way of reflecting on the issue of evil and suffering is that it pictures a God that respects the laws of nature to the point that it becomes inconceivable or even unfair that he might act in history, intervene directly in the lives of people, or be incarnate in Jesus Christ. It is more an intelligent designer. It can be compared to a clockmaker and the universe to a perfect machinery. This is Isaac Newton, who was a believer and thought that his scientific research was a way of proving the existence of God. But for him, the God he wanted to believe in is a God who never intervenes, creates a perfect machinery, a perfect clock, and then lets this clock work by itself. Okay, so it's an intelligent designer that let things follow their course. And this has led to, so today you have the atheists who think, oh, there is no way you can justify the existence of God or a benevolent or powerful God because evil, he should not have allowed evil to exist. So evil is a major argument against the existence of God. And then you have those who are happy with an idea of God as this intelligent designer who does not intervene in our lives. So there is no point in praying God and asking God, God, please help me, because God is just the one who sets the universe in motion and creates the right premises, needs to allow some evils, but then doesn't touch the machinery anymore. Okay, so in other ways, these people do not believe in particular providence anymore, in the ability of God to intervene in our lives. There is no point in praying, but in general providence. The example is, if your neighbor is an architect, you find here, if your neighbor is an architect and your house is falling down because there is a storm, if the neighbor comes and helps you to get out of the house, this is particular providence. If the this neighbor architect has built your house in such a way that it can stand any storm, then this is general providence. He will never come to help you, but he makes sure that the house is solid enough for it not to fall down. So in this framework, the main explanations when it comes to why evil and suffering are there in the world are two. One is the free will defense, which I've already mentioned to you, and the other one is the anti-irregularity defense. So why is there moral evil in the world? Is because freedom is a good so important that it is worth the price. And why is free will so important? Because only if we have free will, we can be in a loving relationship with God. Okay? And then the anti-irregularity argument, number 26, is that for all we know, only in a universe very much like ours could intelligent life, and indeed life of any sort, develop by the operations of the laws of nature, unsupplemented by miracles. And the natural evolution of higher sentient life in a universe like ours involves suffering. Pain seems to be an indispensable component of the evolutionary process after organisms have reached a certain stage of complexity. Every world God could have made that contains higher level sentient creatures either contains patterns of suffering morally equivalent to those of the actual world, or else is massively irregular. Okay, so I'm going to bring a provisional conclusion to this first approach to the issue of evil and suffering by raising two major problems to this picture. The first one, number 27.1, the difficulty with a theodicy that simply asserts that this is the best possible world, is that such theodicies describes a God who is the creator of system, but not a God who is in loving relationship with creatures. Okay, so it's this detached clockmaker or intelligent designer who is not really interested in our lives. As long as he gets good out of the system, in the end, what happens in your lives doesn't matter. And then the idea that the evil that happens in the world will eventually, or is directed to some good eventually. Well, this says the problem with this is that is what we call horrendous or gratuitous evil. Usually, the systems, the theodicies that believe that the evil is kind of necessary to reach a greater good, do not believe that there is gratuitous suffering. They believe that all the suffering, even the one which seems like most unexplainable, is still worth suffering, is still worth for a greater good. The problem is that, especially in the 20th century, especially after the Holocaust, it becomes very, very difficult to maintain an argument of this kind. There has to be some sense of proportion. How is it possible that the death of 30 million people in God's greater scheme can 30 million, more than that, 6 million of Jews, 30 millions in Russia, 100 million probably in China. How can this be justifiable in any possible way? How can this lead to an eventual good? Or the famous tsunami that happened a few years ago in Southeast Asia. Again, 100,000 people died. In one moment. How there needs to be a sense of proportion. I mean, if you want to maintain a good God, a benevolent God, even if you might be open to the idea that some level of struggle, some level of pain might be good, but there has to be a sense of proportion. It's like, when you can believe that if not punishing, but at least disciplining your child can result in a good, even if it is a pain at the moment. But the pain has to be proportionate. I mean, you can't just punish your child to the point of, you can even say you can't kill your child as a way of disciplining him. Okay? This is a bit extreme, but, or even punish him in such a way that he will be traumatized for the rest of his life. So all these arguments really of the best possible world, all these arguments that want us to believe that God in some way, even if he has not created evil, has allowed evil to happen, do not work, or at least do not make sense when we start thinking about horrendous evil. So I love to leave you on this, like suspended. And we are going to look into this much more closely.